All right, next, I'm going to do a little demonstration of my own. I have a can here of the Duster canned air. So this is nothing more than an Office Depot brand canned air, and it's liquid inside. It's like air isn't liquid, but under high pressure, it is. So this is a pressurized can of compressed air. And if I spray it, all right, how come this doesn't spray? There it goes. I have to release that. There we go. So I spray it, and I can use it to clean my keyboard. And already, this is cold. Why is it cold? Because the liquid, when I release the pressure, is forcing it to release at a very tiny, or through a very tiny hole. So only a little bit gets out at a time. Otherwise, it would explosively expand and cool way down real fast. But liquid turning to gas is making it cold. What happens if I turn it upside down and I don't let the mechanism work the way it's supposed to? I just put liquid air inside of this test tube, and you can see it right there. So what's going on with this liquid air? It's pretty dang cold. You can't tell the temperature, but you can probably see as I wipe that, it's turning to condensation. It's getting all frosty on the outside, and it's cold to the touch. Now, why isn't it boiling? Because my thumb is on the top pushing down, and I've got to push hard. It's trying to knock my thumb off. What happens if I release the pressure with my thumb? As soon as I release the pressure, it starts boiling. If I add just a tiny bit of heat from my hand, it boils faster. But as that liquid air turns this extremely cold, it stops boiling really fast. Put a little heat on it for my hand and look at it go. Just a little heat. It's kind of hard to see with all that frost. There it goes. It's boiling at a pretty good clip. Using even more heat. And it's boiling at a pretty good clip. And there's actually frost. This is ice. It's below freezing on the outside of this test tube. Again, you can't really see it from out there, but there's little crystals. You can't see that at all on the screen, but I was able to scrape off a layer of ice on the outside of this test tube. Again, just a very simple illustration of the fact that when you put things under pressure, you can turn a gas to a liquid. In the process of doing this, when they make these, they get hot. These are hot when they first make them, and then they cool off, right? It cools to room temperature. A little feels cooler than room temperature because it's a metal can, but this is just room temperature with the metal coolness that you feel. And as soon as I start going, just that much, and I can feel it, the cooling off of the outside of the can. Again, a whole bunch of ice. You can kind of see the ice build up now. I've let it build up, and you can see that the end of this is completely iced over. It's not very thick, so I can get that off with the heat of my hand pretty quickly. It's now no longer iced. And there goes the boiling again. How can I stop the boiling? It'll stop itself by cooling down. But if I put my hand on it, it wants to boil, but it can't boil. The pressure is building up. It can't boil, it can't cool, and I can feel my thumb wanting to get pushed off the top. And if I do allow my thumb to come off, boom, you saw that little whoosh of bubbling. All right. So that's my little demonstration using just liquid air that you use to clean off your keyboard or whatever electronic device. Let's go back to sharing the screen. I want to go to the next diagram. And this one is a 3-stage ammonia system. I would stick to diagram number 2 and even number 1 as your main study, but number 2, I would suggest as your primary focus. You want to understand refrigeration units? Know this. But you do need to know the concept of a single stage ammonia system, because ammonia is a little bit different. It needs another part called the receiver, and this is your large tank of anhydrous ammonia. There's a huge tank of liquid ammonia in the system, and so as the vapor is released from the system and goes into the compressor heats it, high pressure, and now you've got hot compressed refrigerant. Goes through the condenser. This is the condenser. And the condenser is giving heat to the outside air. So this is the ambient or outside air. And again, you could run a second system. This could be water, a cooling system where you're running your refrigerant with cooling water to really cool it down. But that's expensive to run a secondary cooling system to cool off your condenser. But you can do it. Here's a new item we haven't talked about, an internal heat exchanger. And this allows more efficiency in a commercial system. If I have my refrigerator over here, so here's the expansion valve, and now it's super cool, low pressure. Here, this is inside my refrigerator. I've got a fan that's going to blow that into my cooler. Here's my refrigerator unit or my warehouse. Comes out of the warehouse. It's now really cool. It goes into the receiver. And as it comes up, it's really cool. Why not preheat that a little bit using some of the heat from the condenser? And the condenser is getting a little bit cooler. You win in both directions. The refrigerant coming, in this case, from your right to the left, that is your high side, your high pressure hot side. Why not exchange a little bit of heat from the other side? And why not preheat the refrigerant before it goes into the compressor? It makes the system a little bit more efficient. Well worth it in terms of when I say a little bit more efficient, it can make or break a commercial unit, making them cost effective or just energy inefficient. This really, really helps make a high-end system. So the two things, the internal heat exchanger, which gives a little bit of heat from the high side and the low side. It exchanges the heat on the way between the evaporator and the condenser. And the other item is the receiver, which you need for a anhydrous ammonia system. Now on diagrams 2 and 3, you just have one compressor. So you have two pressures. You have high pressure and low pressure. Between the compressor and the expansion valve is high pressure. From the expansion valve back to the other side of the compressor is low pressure. High and low, that's all you got. It's a little more hard to see that on diagram 3, but in diagram 2, the compressor, this is the high side, high pressure, and I got low pressure. And that's it. One compressor, two pressures, high and low. You can also have what's called a two-stage ammonia system. Two compressors, three pressures. So here's compressor number 1. Here's compressor number 2. Now, if I look here, the arrows, this one doesn't have a traditional diagram, an engineering diagram to see which way it's going, but it does have the arrows to show which way it's going. So this is the low side compressor. So let's start at the evaporator. We know the evaporator is inside the refrigerator. That is the lowest pressure in the system. Low pressure, low side is the evaporator. So it goes from the evaporator. Don't worry about this other device called an accumulator in the diagram. But now I compress it once. And then it goes through an intercooler to take away some of that heat, and it compresses it again. From an engineering standpoint, this makes sense, because if you really want a really cool refrigeration system that's going to get things really cold, you've got to have huge differences in pressure, from near vacuum inside the evaporator on the low side to very high pressures on the high side. Difficult to do with one compressor. You can do it, but it's expensive and inefficient. Rather than making one really expensive, really engineering difficult compressor that can do that, why not make two much more modest compressors that easily do their job? One brings it from vacuum to about 30 pounds of pressure, 30 pounds per square inch. And the next one takes it from 30 up to about 200 pounds per square inch. Much more cost effective when you look at the engineering that's required to build these compressors and make it work. In the process, you can also use this intercooler design, which is a type of heat exchanger type of a deal that is going to get rid of some of the heat between compression cycles. So by the time it gets past the condenser and back to the expansion valve, it is going to be oh, here's the expansion valve, sorry. On this diagram, it's not the bow ties. On this diagram, the expansion valve is right here. So by the time it gets to the expansion valve, it's not quite as hot because of this heat exchanger. You've taken some of the heat out on the way. And so by the time it gets here and you're starting the boiling process, it's already cooled down a little bit. So it can get really cold by the time it gets through this evaporator. But there are other challenges. If you're making something that makes things really, really cold, you have the new challenge of everything freezing. Water in the atmosphere just building up and creating frozen blocks of ice on your refrigeration coils and things. And I've seen expansion valves in a block of ice that's like 8 inches thick. That's not good. you got to deal with those kinds of things. But those are your refrigeration diagrams. Again, for the exam purposes, for really understanding, I would suggest sticking to diagram 2. It has the 4 primary main parts that you need to understand: your compressor, condenser, expansion valve, evaporator. 1, 2, 3, 4. It has where you have vapor, liquid, to kind of visualize what's going on. What it doesn't have here, which you really need to know, and you might write this in your own notes on your own diagram, this is called the high side, high pressure, high temperature. This is called the low side, low pressure, low temperature. The high side is outside the building, outside the refrigerator, getting heat away from the unit. The low side is inside the building or inside the refrigerator, trying to make it cold. Okay, and that's it. That is the basics of how the heat pump style refrigeration works.